Okay, I think I'm all set. Lots of stuff to do, lots of stuff to get through. So today what I want to talk about and what I want you to look at this week, so you'll see on the Brightspace there is a link to the Open Music Theory page about augmented sixth chords. I'd like you to read that chapter. You'll also see there that there is a document with some examples of augmented sixth chords, and we'll go through those. Part of your notes that I'd like you to submit for today is to take that document and follow along as I analyze them and analyze with me. So that's going to be part of your notes, is to upload that just to sort of make sure that you went through this video and you got through all of that. We're going to analyze all of it. I've said this previously, so when I was talking about modal mixture and Neapolitan chords, that nothing has changed structurally. Everything is functioning exactly the same way. You have the same order of operations. When you have tonic, it can be followed by subdominant. Subdominant can go to other subdominants, or it can go to dominant. Once you're on a dominant harmony, you must go to the tonic, can't backtrack to a subdominant, except in those few instances where you have contrapuntal harmony, passing chords, neighbor chords. Everything is functioning the same way. You still move from weak subdominants to strong subdominants. If you see a two chord, regardless as to whether it's, you know, a natural two chord, a mixture two chord, or a flat two chord, it's still a two chord. When we write the differences in Roman numerals, so say that we have, you know, here's our natural two chord, here's our minor two chord or diminished two chord, and our flat two chord. The differences in how we're notating these Roman numerals have to do with the specific notes in the chord, but fundamentally, in a kind of, you know, absolute sense, this is two. And it behaves like two, it is two, no matter what. The chords we're going to talk about today, they are technically subdominant. What's odd about them is that they don't have a Roman numeral. We're getting to this point, and this is really where the rule of sharps go up, flats go down comes into, you know, full form. We're starting to get to this point where chromatic voice leading is usurping harmonic function. Essentially, you have gotten most of the information that you need for the midterm. We're kind of gonna add a few things here and there, but from this point forward, chromatic voice leading starts to reign supreme. If you see, for example, something like this, this is more important, this is more significant than, say, you know, 1, 2, 5, it doesn't matter what chord progression I'm writing, just the idea of there being a functional progression of harmonies. You're going to start to see that chromatic voice leading takes the lead role in terms of how we think about and conceive of how harmonies are functioning. Because what will happen is harmonies will appear to be not functioning, and you'll want to be looking for chromatic voice leading as an explanation for what's going on with those harmonies. So again, what we're looking at today, still functional harmony, but it's at the very edge of functional, or the very end of functional harmony. Let's revisit our friend, the Phrygian cadence. I talked about this in class last week. A Phrygian cadence is basically a very distinctive semi-cadence or half cadence. So it's in the class of half cadences. And functionally what a Phrygian cadence is, and it's called a Phrygian cadence because of baseline motion. If we're in C minor, and this is something that generally happens in minor keys, we'll have scale degree 6, so this is 6 with a little hat, to scale degree 5 in the bass, and that it's harmonized with 4, 6, and then 5, or you would just see in the figures 6, and then a natural. And that sort of thing sounds like this. Very distinctive cadence. You hear it at the end of a lot of Baroque movements. And it's a tricky one. It's a tricky chord to voice in terms of where the notes are distributed. So if I write out this chord, write out these chords, I'll get rid of my scale degrees. We need A flat, a C, and an F. Where do we resolve this? Okay, so let's resolve it to our 5 chord here. Let's just do something simple. Let's just see what happens. Okay, so if you look at this, tell me if you notice any voice leading errors. Well, you can't tell me, but look to see if there are any voice leading errors. You should see that there is parallel octave. That won't do, so let's just double the third. Oh wait, can't do that. That's a leading tone. Can't double the leading tone. Also, that means that we would have an augmented second. Okay, so let's change the first note. Let's have it be, I don't know, an F, and then have that F go up to a G. Oh shoot. Now we have parallel octaves again. There is basically one voicing that works for this, and that is to double the third of the chord, meaning, so in this voicing, the C, double the C, and then have those 2 voices on the C split apart. This is basically the one voicing that gets you away from any voice leading errors. So you have to double this note, or technically this is the 5th of the chord, but the 3rd of this particular voicing. So if we write out our 4 chord in root position, here's our 4 chord, it's the 5th, we're doubling the 5th, and this happens to be in first inversion, so in that first inversion version, the 3rd of that chord is doubled. So this voicing is the classic voicing for Phrygian cadences because you want to avoid all these voice leading errors. Let's travel for a moment to the city of Naples. It is 1720 in Naples, and we are joining the great Neapolitan composer Giovanni Battista Aurelian. I don't know who that is, but he's a very famous composer in Naples. And he's written a cantata. This cantata is an ode to Saint Cecilia. There is a Saint Cecilia's lament, and it ends with this Phrygian cadence. Cecilia's lament, she's crying, and as her tears fall, they make music as they strike the ground. It's very, very moving piece, very pathetic in terms of pathos. At the premiere, and I should say this piece was finished the morning of the premiere, and the parts, when they arrive at the performance, are literally wet. The ink is wet, and it's been raining outside, and there's splotches everywhere. And the first violinist gets his part, and it looks kind of like this. There's a splotch. And the first violinist is looking at it and thinks, gosh, is that an F sharp? That must be. So, and I'll just play it. Everyone in the ensemble looks at the concertmaster. It's like, what are you doing? What was that? What is this? What is this harmony? And the performance is a great success. The piece is a huge knockout, and curtain call after curtain call. And Aurelian comes to the concertmaster after the performance and says, people have been asking me all night, what is that harmony? I didn't write that. What did you do? And the concertmaster's like, I don't fire me. I didn't do anything. I didn't mean it. It was just it looked like an F sharp in my part. And as you know, sharps go up, as they should. So at this point, Aurelian liked this chord so much that he just gets rid of that root note in the 4 chord. Why bother? That sonority is so interesting. It's so mysterious. It's so full of the otherworldly. He just changes the part and makes that note and F sharp. He essentially takes a passing tone, a chromatic passing tone, a non-chord tone, and integrates it into the harmony because he just likes the way it sounds. Let's analyze this harmony now that we've written it. The first thing to ask yourself with any harmony is, what is that harmony's root position? So if we write this in root position, or try to, and remember, root position in Western tonal harmony is defined by there being stacks of major or minor thirds, pure natural thirds, as it were. So if we write this in root position, so we have F sharp, A flat, and then our two C's, is that a root position? Well, it can't be, because that interval from F sharp to A flat is not a natural major third or minor third. It's a diminished third, or if you have it in this inversion, an augmented sixth, that is a flat, B flat, C, D, E flat, F sharp. That's an augmented sixth interval. There is no root position for this chord. There is no we can put it in every possible inversion. We will never get a stack of major or minor thirds. We'll never get it. So this is, technically speaking, not a functional harmony. However, follow the voice leading. So if you remember in the fall, I talked about the diminished seventh chords. So if I write out a diminished seventh chord, B natural, D, F, A flat, this is two nesting diminished fifths sort of stuck together. Here's a diminished fifth, and here's a diminished fifth. Diminished intervals want to collapse. So if you have diminished fifth, diminished third, diminished seventh, all of these intervals collapse. Anytime you have a diminished interval, it collapses. Anytime you have an augmented interval, conversely, it wants to expand, it wants to split, it wants to move outwards. So this would be, if I wrote this in first inversion, we have our D, F, A flat, B natural. Now you can see from the F to the B natural, we have an augmented fourth. This interval now wants to expand, so that would resolve outwards to a C and an E flat, whereas these over here would collapse down to G, E flat, and C. Okay, so just remember that augmented intervals expand, diminished intervals collapse. This is the same with an augmented second. Let's go back to this chord over here, this first inversion diminished seventh chord. This augmented fourth expands out, right? And this diminished fifth inside it collapses in. In aggregate, that means if we look at this top interval here, this interval of an augmented second from the A flat to the B natural, that interval ultimately expanded. It went from these two notes outwards. So just remember that. Diminished intervals collapse, augmented intervals expand. That'll be really important with these harmonies specifically. So we have this augmented interval at the boundary of the chord. That augmented interval wants to expand. And as you can see, that's exactly what it does here. The F sharp goes up to G, and the A flat goes down to G. There's a lot of direction, there's a lot of tension in this harmony, and part of that tension comes from the fact that this is not a functional harmony. This is not a 4 chord, this is not a 2 chord, this is not a 6 chord. It's on scale degree 6, but we will not give it a Roman numeral. That's because this chord is pure voice leading encapsulated into a harmony. We've taken chromatic voice leading and kind of locked it in amber like some prehistoric insect. So this is what we would call an Italian augmented sixth chord. Now, there is no historical basis for this being called an Italian augmented sixth chord. My story about Giovanni Battista Aurelian, obviously totally made up. They're just kind of ways to remember the specific voice leading of each harmony. But Italian augmented sixth chord, we have this doubled third here in the chord, just as with the Phrygian cadence. They split outwards, and then we have that augmented sixth at the outside that moves outwards into an octave. Okay, so that's an Italian augmented sixth. You'll notice it sounds a lot like a dominant seventh chord without the fifth, and also with a doubled leading tone. You can resolve there. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So now, next on our national journey, let's do this in another key just for a little practice. Aurelian takes his band on tour, and they travel to France, where they're going to perform this work, this ode to Saint Cecilia at Versailles for the court of Louis the 700th. I don't know who was king at that point. By this point, he has changed the music. He has changed the score to now have that augmented sixth locked in, that Italian augmented sixth chord. The concertmaster got a lot of credit for accidentally inventing this chord. As it turns out, he was drunk, which is why he really couldn't read his part. The second violinist is feeling kind of salty. Concertmaster got all the credit. In this performance, and let's write in our Italian augmented sixth, and in this case, we are in the key of E minor. Notice all of these are minor keys so far. We'll look at these in major. If we're in E minor, and we want to find this Italian augmented sixth, we have to look for what a Phrygian cadence would be in E minor. And remember, that is scale degree 6 falling down into scale degree 5 in the bass. So that would be C falling down to B in the bass. And then we have our, to make it a Phrygian cadence, that'd be 4, 6, collapsing down to 5. Remember which note we would double when we have a Phrygian cadence. It's really the fifth of the root position chord, or the third of the chord in inversion. So if we write out the notes of this chord, you can see that bottom interval is a third. We double that third. We double that note. So this would be our voicing. This, and now they float outwards to make our 5 chord. And this would be a proper Phrygian cadence in E minor. Okay? So now we make this our Italian augmented sixth chord, and to make that, remember, we have to produce that augmented sixth interval. So that would be, here's our sixth, our interval of a sixth. Now we stretch that sixth. It's a major sixth. We now push one of those voices up a half step. It makes it larger than a sixth, but still spelled like a sixth. This is now no longer a 4/6 chord, because there's technically no root position anymore. We can't get nice stacks of thirds. This is something else. This is outside our functional tonal harmony system. So this is our Italian augmented sixth. And I wrote IT and then a plus sign, then 6. Okay, so the second violinist, as I mentioned, is a little salty that the concertmaster got all the credit. So this time, the second violinist decides he's going to get to the note he's resolving to early. He's going to play it sooner than he's supposed to. So, we have this and this. The second violinist, let's just call this an anticipation. That's technically what that is. Anticipation. I'll play that again. So here's the Italian augmented sixth. And now here's the Italian augmented sixth with the second violinist playing an anticipation. So the performance is a huge success, and And you'll notice we're in a different key because we had a different singer for this performance, and she couldn't sing as low as the previous singer, so Aurelian had to transpose. That's why we're in a different key now. Louis the 700th loves the performance and tells Aurelian he's going to build a statue in his honor as a thank him for this brilliant performance, especially the end of Saint Cecilia's Lament, which was just so moving and so mysterious and clearly music of the gods. And Aurelian, again, embarrassed that his instrumentalists are coming up with better ideas than him, he goes up to the second violinist and he says, "What did you do? Tell me." And the second violinist is a little embarrassed, but it's like, well, you know, I just played in anticipation. I just played the F sharp a little sooner. So Aurelian goes home and he's like, wow, that was such an interesting sound. And he writes it out. So this is the chord that our second violinist played. I'll write this in treble clef so we can really look at it. A little more space here, actually. So here's C, E, F sharp, A sharp. Now, if we look at the intervals in this harmony, we have an augmented fourth, and we have another augmented fourth. These are sort of nested together. This gives us a couple of options, actually. So we can resolve this chord outwards, and you know, the outer harmony or the outer interval is that augmented sixth chord. That's going to resolve out no matter what. That's going to resolve the A sharp up to a B and the C down to a B. But when it comes to the inner voices, we have a couple places we can go. We can resolve it to a 5 chord, as we did previously. We could also resolve this we still get our half cadence, right? We can still end this as we were, but we just get a little bit of a fancier resolution here. Okay? So this is an option. You have those two options. You can go directly to 5 or go directly to a cadential 6/4. So we're going to call this chord the French augmented sixth chord. This harmony is going to be really important for the 19th century, later 19th century, and even into the 20th century, because there's an inherent ambiguity in this chord. If we kind of study the structure of it, it's symmetrical. It has this sort of symmetry baked in, a major third on top and a major third on the bottom, and they're an augmented fourth apart. Now, if we change which third is on top, the quality of the chord, the sound of the chord, basically doesn't change. And actually we can go one step further, which is if we have the F sharp and the A sharp on the bottom, that's in the C natural. What if we respell that so that it's a G flat, a B flat, and a C and an E, right? These two chords sound the same, right? Exactly the same sound. But now this is our sort of root position, French augmented sixth chord, in the key of B flat. Here's our augmented sixth on the outside. This resolves out to F and F. So that means we took this chord here, that was the French augmented sixth in E minor, and by respelling it gives us a pathway to another key entirely. I'll play you what this sounds like. Should go there. Modulated to a completely distant key. Remember this is going to be important in a few weeks when we start looking at chromatic modulations. We take chords like this, which are inherently ambiguous, that have this kind of, these sort of weird internal properties, we respell them, and then it gives us a pathway to another key. Now, the band goes on tour to Hamburg. Specifically, they are going to give a performance of St. Cecilia's Lament at the Church of St. Catherine's in Hamburg, which is the home of a little-known church musician named Johann Sebastian Bach. He will be there that day. He will actually be playing the organ in this performance. Johann Sebastian Bach is known for being a kind of a cantankerous, rude personality. He thinks that he's right all the time and gets annoyed at people who are of a lesser intellect than him. This is true. In this case, we are going to write this in F minor because, as it turns out, the organ at St. Catherine's Church is tuned differently than the organ at Versailles. And so they needed to transpose everything because the organ was tuned specifically, and Bach was like, I'm not gonna transpose. You all have to transpose. I'm making this up. So we're in the key of F minor. Let's go through the same process we went through before. F minor. If we have a Phrygian cadence in F minor, we need scale degree 6 to scale degree 5. The proper voicing for that Phrygian cadence is this. So that's 4, 6 to 5. To make our Italian augmented sixth, we create that augmented sixth interval. Remember that voice leading, which we compress into just one chord. Okay, so this is no longer 4/6. This is an Italian augmented sixth. To get the French augmented sixth, we take one of those doubled inner voices and we split them apart. One of them is an anticipation of the resolution. Okay, so now this is our French augmented sixth. French augmented sixth, FR plus 6. But Mr. Bach on the organ doesn't like the sound of this chord, and so rather than playing the chord he's supposed to play, he raises that inner voice up a half step further. Let's actually write it like this so you can really see where this comes from. So we end up with this harmony here. Sounds very much like a dominant 7th chord. Now let's see what happens when we resolve this as written. Let's just call this is a French augmented sixth with an upper neighbor. Okay? You will notice there are parallel fifths in the resolution. Bach, Mr. Bach, being the consummate contrapuntalist, knows this. He knows that this is going to happen, and so rather than resolving directly to a 5 chord, he knows the best thing to do is to suspend a couple of those voices. So the augmented sixth interval on the outside, that resolves up. as it's supposed to. This goes up, that goes down, sharps go up, flats go down. But these inner voices stay in place, they suspend. So we get a 6/4 chord, and then they resolve down to 5. So essentially we get a cadential 6/4. We have to resolve this into a cadential 6/4. Otherwise we get parallel fifths. So Aurelian, again, has been shown up by, the greatest contrapuntalist in Europe, and he asks Mr. Bach what he did, and Mr. Bach told him what he did. And Aurelian, ever the musical thief, decides that he loves the way this harmony sounds, and so he's going to get rid of the French part of it. He's just going to integrate that neighbor tone that Mr. Bach added, and he's going to call this a German augmented sixth. He's really kind of collecting harmonies as he travels around Europe. So this chord, as you can see, and we'll spell this in treble clef so you can see what it looks like. Spelled like this. If I spelled this just a little differently, so you can see, that would give us a dominant 7th chord, but instead of a C flat, we have a B natural. Okay, remember, the voice leading gets baked into the harmony. And now this has to resolve out to a cadential 6/4. Non-negotiable. Now, when I say that, you know that that means there are going to be some exceptions. And as I've said about exceptions before, it's not that I'm trying to say that there is a right way that music should be and a wrong way. It's just that when composers do the wrong thing, it's a big deal. They know what they're doing. They know what the right way should have been, and they've decided to bypass it and go to the thing that they want. So will you see German augmented 6 chords resolving directly to a root position 5? Yes, you will. And effectively, that's like putting a big accent on it, because we have that parallel fifth. But the proper way to resolve this, the proper resolution for a German augmented sixth, is to go into that cadential 6/4, 5/6/4 to 5/3. Here it is, 5/6/4 to 5/3. So these are the three basic kinds of augmented sixth chords. There is a variation on the German augmented sixth chord, and I'll show you what that is now. So on their way back to Naples, the band travels through Basel, Switzerland. They're going to give a concert in the main cathedral in Basel, but the Swiss authorities have recently banned music in minor keys because they thought that it was not good for the spiritual well-being of the population to listen to music that is in a minor key. So if they want to perform, everything must be in a major key. Well, this is quite distressing for Mr. Aurelian, because that basically changes his music, but they say, well, if you want to perform, it has to be in a major key, and they don't have the money to make it to Naples. They have to do this performance in Basel if they want to make it back home. So, fine, he changes everything to a major key. So now Saint Cecilia's Lament is now in the key of, we're going to go back to E, because remember this was because of the organ in Hamburg was transposed. We're now going to be in E major. So we're in the key of E major. So this now starts to bring in the concept of modal mixture. If we want a Phrygian cadence in E major, it is not a Phrygian cadence unless it is lowered scale degree 6, or in other words, natural scale degree 6 in E minor or whatever minor key, going down to 5. What makes it a Phrygian cadence is that half step down into scale degree 5. So if here's scale degree 5 in E major. A half step above that is C natural. So that is our lowered scale degree 6. So this is essentially now modal mixture. We have borrowed, and I think probably they can pass this by the Swiss authorities, because as it turns out, the Swiss authorities, they're not as musically literate as all of you, but it has to sound like it's in major. We have our modal mixture 4, 6 to 5 spelled the same way as it would be in minor. So we write out our Phrygian cadence with the proper voice leading, where we double that third of the inverted chord, or the fifth of the root position chord. So doubling this, and then we put that note on top. Okay, that would be in major. So now let's make our Italian augmented sixth. IT augmented sixth, and you should just go ahead and do this. What note do we have to raise? We have to make that augmented sixth, so we raise the A sixth, the major sixth, up to augmented sixth. Okay. Now if we want to make our French augmented sixth, we take that one of those inner voices, peel it up in anticipation of the next chord. So this is now our French augmented sixth. And now, if we want to have our German augmented sixth, we would bring it up a half step higher. However, if we did this, so this is now a German augmented sixth, remember it needs to cadence, or it needs to resolve into a cadential 6/4, and those two inner voices are held over in suspension in order to avoid that parallel fifth. That would mean we would get what sounds like a minor key resolution, and that wouldn't be good because the Swiss authorities might fine them for this. Can't have that. No minor chords allowed in Basel, Switzerland. So to get around this, Aurelian respells that G natural as what? Just take a moment. What would be a G natural respelled? And remember, we want to end up in a major sonority. We want to end up with something that sounds like a major key. So remember, sharps go up, flats go down. What accidental could we change that G natural to so that that note, that pitch, wants to resolve up? Think about it. Pause the video, whatever. Respell it to an F double sharp. There's our F double sharp. That F double sharp wants to resolve up to a G sharp. And now we have our cadence, our cadential 6/4 in what sounds like E major. So this is what is, well, there are two ways to call this. You can just call this a German augmented sixth in a major key, or, and this is somewhat uncommon, but it is a thing, you can call this a Swiss augmented sixth. Swiss augmented sixth meaning that it resolves to major. Okay, or it is the major key equivalent of the German augmented sixth. This terminology is uncommon because, let's just say, Aurelian would rather forget about the fact that he had to change St. Cecilia's Lament into a major key. It was horrifying. It upset him greatly, and he would rather not think about it ever again. So we never hear about this Swiss augmented sixth, but this is a thing. This is a term that's sometimes thrown around. You could just as easily call this a German augmented sixth. That's fine. They speak German in Basel. But just know that dual terminology is out there. Swiss augmented sixth, German augmented sixth. But you would only call it a Swiss augmented sixth if it resolves to major, or if we're in a major key. Okay, so this is kind of the basic theory behind these three sort of four chords. But let me write these out kind of in sequence so you can see them right next to each other. Let's do this in a different key now. Let's just do it in C major. If we're in C major, we want to find scale degree 6, lowered scale degree 6. So that would be scale degree 6 from C minor. So here's our lowered scale degree 6, resolves down to 5. The Italian augmented sixth chord would be these notes, Italian augmented sixth. Here's the French augmented sixth. Here is the German augmented sixth. And just for the fun of it, here is the Swiss augmented sixth, or German augmented sixth in major. So here's the Italian. Resolves to this. French can again resolve straight to 5, or could go to a cadential 6/4 if you wish. German must resolve to a cadential 6/4. You have no choice in the matter. Okay. C 6/4, and then Swiss resolves to a major key cadential 6/4. So these are our different flavors of chords that have absorbed chromatic voice leading. Now I would, just like the Neapolitan chord, I would say that these fall into the category of super subdominants, meaning they are even more subdominant than other subdominants. So I would say that you could go from, say, a 2 chord to one of these augmented sixth chords. These have a very strong tendency to want to resolve to 5. And that has to do with that augmented interval on the outside that wants to resolve out. So let's just do a basic chord progression here. Let's pick a different key, like let's just do G minor. These chords, again, come from the minor key side of the universe, the musical universe, which means, as with modal mixture, you can borrow them, you can bring them into the major key realm. And I'll do an example of that. But okay, so if we're in G minor, let's do something like 1 chord, a 1/6 chord, then a 4 chord, and then we'll have our Italian. We'll start with Italian augmented sixth, and then we'll have our 5 chord, and then 1. Okay, so let's just do really simple voice leading. Before you watch me do this, you should just do this yourself first and then compare it to what I've done. So pause the video now and do it yourself, then restart it and see what I did. Okay, so now we've gotten to the Italian augmented sixth chord, so let's recall which of those notes is doubled. It's the third of the chord, the third of this written chord. So if I write that out from the bottom, it's going to look like a 4 chord with a raised root, and I've doubled those middle 2 notes, that third. So I could put those, I don't have to double them in exactly the same place. They could be octave displaced. So let's do something like this. You'll notice there's a funky interval here, that diminished third. I talked about this with Neapolitan harmonies, that this is allowed sometimes because there's a common destination. And actually, if we follow this through, the F sharp, 5, 1, you'll see this E flat here and this C sharp, both are kind of pointing to the same destination. So that's an instance where you can kind of get away with weird intervallic leaps. There's another way to get around this, which would have been, I could change the 4 chord to a 4/6 chord, something like that. And now that C to C sharp is just a chromatic half step. And you can see now the origins of the Phrygian cadence, which is that. Okay, but now, okay, so let's hear that progression. Okay, let's get rid of some chords in between. Too many chords in this. Let's get rid of this, get rid of this. Remember, these augmented sixth chords are technically subdominant function. So I can use them as a subdominant. Okay, could even be simpler than that. Could just go from 1 to the Italian augmented sixth. That is tonally complete. This harmony, this Italian augmented sixth, because it originated in a 4/6 chord, it still has that subdominant character built into it. It's just a very strong subdominant. It's a subdominant that wants to resolve to a 5 chord. So let's convert this to a different augmented sixth chord. Remember, if we wanted it to be a French augmented sixth chord, we would take one of those doubled inner voices and slip it up to one of the notes that's from the 5 chord, an anticipation of the 5 chord that follows. So that would be this, I'll turn this G, that note. It's an anticipation of the 5th of the 5 chord to follow. This is now a French augmented sixth chord. Very kind of mysterious sounding sonority. Okay. Now let's turn this into a German augmented sixth chord. Remember what the prerequisites are for this. It will sound like a dominant 7th chord. So I take that inner voice, that anticipation of the 5th of the 5 chord that follows, we raise it even a half step further. So we have a 5th and then this diminished 5th on top. Now remember, this cannot resolve directly to 5 because we would get these parallel 5ths. So what we have to do is suspend 2 of those inner voices, or 2 of the voices from the German augmented sixth chord. We would have to suspend them into a cadential 6/4. So this would be 5/6/4 to 5/3. Then that resolves to the 5 chord. Okay, so here's our progression. Okay, pretty cool. So here's another interesting point. You'll notice if I change this E flat to an E natural, let's spell out what that harmony would be. So we have C sharp, E natural, G, B flat. You'll notice that this harmony is now a 7 diminished 7 of 5. It's very close to these augmented sixth chords. In fact, I could put it before, so let me do it on both sides. So that was, first thing we have is 7 diminished 6/5, and then German augmented sixth. And then I'll switch them again so you can hear it. Okay, so now I'm going to flip them. So now we have the German augmented sixth first, then the secondary dominant. So German augmented sixth, then 7 diminished 6/5 of 5. This is something that you will see because these two chords are so close to each other. You'll see that they might be respelled. We could do this with any of the augmented sixth chords, in fact, I think. So if I write a French augmented sixth chord, now we have a 5/4/3 of 5. Could have gone the other way too. Same with Italian augmented sixth. That is just like if I were to spell a 7 diminished 6 of 5, you'll notice there's only one note that's different. That E natural and E flat. That's the only thing that's different from the Italian augmented sixth and that secondary dominant. So this is to say, the reason these chords contain so much tension is because on the one hand they're a super subdominant, and on the other hand they sound an awful lot like a secondary dominant of 5. When you will find these chords is usually towards the end of a phrase, towards a cadence, at a point when the music is kind of directing us towards a cadence, towards a final thought. Because there's so much finality in them, they really push us towards 5. Let's do one example in major. It's going to be exactly the same, but let's pick a key like D major. There's our one chord, and we'll just keep this simple. We'll treat them as the subdominants that they are. Remember, this starts with a Phrygian cadence, which is lowered scale degree 6. And let's actually just write all 3 of these, or 4, I should say. 3 of these augmented 6 harmonies. So we need lowered scale degree 6. That goes to a 5 of some sort, and then 1. So if with our D major chord, that's easy enough. I'll just write any old D major chord, voicing, just to have to deal with the consequences. So Italian would be like writing a 4 chord. That would be our minor 4/6 chord with the 2 doubled notes in the middle, the 3rd of the chord, or the 5th of the root position chord. So we have to make that augmented 6th interval, so we raise the 6th, the interval of the 6th, and now we have an augmented 6th on the outside. Like that. So this would be Italian augmented 6, and it's, again, always so worth writing these in the simplest, most compact. It's not root position, but it's as close a thing as you'll get to root position with these things, because you really want to make sure that you get the exact pitches right. So this is our Italian augmented 6th. Remember our French augmented 6th, we took one of those 2 doubled notes and slipped it up a step. So now we have our French augmented 6th. Okay, that's our French augmented 6th. And now if we want to make this a major key German augmented 6th, also known as a Swiss augmented 6th, we want to take that E and make it, raise it a half step, but raise it a half step such that this note wants to resolve to an F sharp, to the 3rd of D major. So we have We'll make it an E sharp, right? Sharps go up, flats go down. This, we'll just call this German augmented sixth, and this must resolve to a cadential 6/4, which then becomes 5/3, then 1. Okay, so we have our basic voicings. Now let's do some voice leading. Keep the voices as close to where they started as possible. So there is our augmented sixth interval, and we have the soprano and the alto joined together. So our Italian. And then essentially in this case we're going to have the tenor stay in place, the alto stay in place, the soprano moves up. Now we have our French augmented sixth, and then again keep all these voices in the same place. But then that soprano, we raise her a half step. We put this increasing tension in this harmony as we raise that top voice up. That E sharp wants to become an F sharp. It's sort of a tendency tone in this case. I don't need that sharp there, it's already in the key. That augmented sixth, the B flat and the G sharp, they push apart from each other like you know, the same poles of a magnet. They push away from each other, and we get that cadential 6/4, which resolves down, and then 5, and then 1. All right, so I'll play these all in a row. I'll erase my scribblings in bass clef. So that's what this is what this sounds like. Okay, there we go. So as you can see, each of these augmented sixth chords are just, you know, a half step away from each other. The only chord in this case where you couldn't really backtrack would be this German augmented sixth chord with the major key spelling, the Swiss spelling. That you wouldn't really backtrack, but you could go from a French augmented sixth to an Italian. You could go from a minor key German spelling to a French spelling. Like, you can move back and forth between these different versions of augmented sixth chords because these chords are voice leading chords. These chords are formed out of voice leading, so it makes perfect sense that you could move between them using voice leading. This is the theory behind augmented sixth chords. So just remember, you got to remember the process. Starts as a Phrygian cadence. You raise the root of the chord, so in this case that's a G. You raise the root of that 4 chord, you produce that augmented sixth interval. That augmented sixth interval now has a lot of tension. It wants to resolve outwards because augmented intervals resolve out, diminished intervals resolve in. And let me show you an instance of when you might actually see that collapsing interval. So pick another key. Let's just do C major, because this is actually going to be a little brain twisting. Let's do a progression kind of like this. I'm going to have a French augmented 6. Remember, it's on scale degree 6. So here's 1. We're going to have 2, 6, 5. This will be our French augmented 6th, and then 5. Okay, so again, do this yourself. Pause the video, unpause it, see what I did, and compare. So we start with 1. Let's just start here. 2, 6, 5. So 2 is D, right? If it's 6, 5, that means it's a chordal 7th chord. So here's a 2, 7 chord, and then If I bring the D on top, that is a 2-6-5. So let's keep the voices as close to where they started as possible. Okay, there's a 2-6-5 chord. So French augmented sixth chord, write the augmented sixth interval. We need that most definitely. So here's our A flat. What's a sixth above that? Is an F. To make that an augmented sixth, we have to raise that F. So there's our augmented sixth. And then a quick way to find the French augmented sixth chord is from that top note, that F sharp, an augmented fourth down, and then from the bottom note, the A flat, an augmented fourth up. There's your French augmented sixth. That's the structure. 2 nested augmented fourths. This would be the simplest voice leading. Okay, so let's play this progression. Again, we went from a 2-chord, 2-7 chord, to a French augmented sixth. Again, super subdominant, stronger even than 2. But let's say our cellist was feeling a little lazy and didn't want to have to leap that third up, or we just wanted the tension of a rising chromatic half step, right? So that would be an F sharp, and let's take that A flat that I just removed and let's substitute the F sharp in the tenor with that A flat. This is where things get real fun. Okay, so now let's hear this. It's the same chord, same notes anyway, but now instead of it being an augmented sixth interval between the A flat and the F sharp, essentially what I did is I swapped them. So now we have F sharp and A flat. That's a diminished tenth, a diminished tenth. Let's bring that down within an octave, because once intervals go above an octave, you want to find their octave equivalent. It is a diminished third. So this spelling is, in fact, a French diminished third. It's the same chord, does basically the same thing. We just swapped the voice leading, or swapped voices. And now remember, augmented intervals expand, diminished intervals collapse. And this is a perfect example of that. Here's our diminished interval collapsing. Okay. You can do this with basically any of these augmented sixth chords, have them in any inversion. You just have to keep track of where's the flat, where's the sharp. If you resolve that sharp up and resolve that flat down, you're set. Doesn't matter if it's an augmented sixth or a diminished third, sharps go up, flats go down. Okay? That's why I pound that in starting in the fall with secondary dominance, but it really pays off here because voice leading reigns supreme. Because again, that's not a Roman numeral. That's a description of a voice leading that has happened enough times that we gave it a name. You could, at this point, take a break, rinse your brain out, pause the video, come back later. At this point, we're going to do some analysis of pieces of music and look at how composers are using these things. And so you might want to break, come back later, and I, in fact, might even go take a break, and we'll pick up in a moment. Now that I have sated myself with celery and peanut butter, let's look at some examples. So again, all of these examples are on the Brightspace. This document is on the Brightspace. There's 3 pages. We're going to go through all of it. Giovanni Paisiello. I don't know who this is. I feel like I shouldn't show something if I don't know what it is. The early classical composer, 1740 to 1816. So let's see what this text is saying. Il mondo afflitto. The afflicted world. Okay. Oh, that's good. Afflitto. Afflicted, sad, pained, sorrowing, mournful, distressed. That's what this word means. Afflitto. Distressed. What a perfect word. This is from the Passion of Jesus Christ. So let's hear this little excerpt here. Okay, there we go. And that's a perfect example of where you might find chromatically altered harmonies, is on the word that you want to put a giant exclamation point next to. Afflitto, pained, distressed. Afflitto. Oh, perfect. It's exactly what you would expect. So let's figure out what kind of augmented sixth chord this is, or if it is an augmented sixth chord. So if it's an augmented sixth chord, we are looking for the interval of an augmented sixth. It just so happens that these chords tend to happen on scale degree 6. However, we will see instances where they happen on other scale degrees too. So don't get glued to scale degree 6. Just know that they tend to happen on scale degree 6. The reason we call them augmented sixth chords is because of the interval of an augmented sixth. So let's write this out in the closest thing we could possibly get to a root position. So we have our C flat, we have an E flat, and we have an A natural. So where's it our augmented sixth? It's between the C flat and the A natural. That's our augmented sixth. That means augmented intervals expand outwards. The A natural goes up to a B flat. The C flat goes down to a B flat. This is definitely an augmented sixth chord. The question now is what flavor augmented sixth chord? And if you what you should do is have just sort of like a cheat sheet of Italian, French, and German augmented sixths is sort of written out. And remember, an Italian augmented sixth chord is just that minor 4 chord with the root raised. That's 4/6 chord with the root raised, and generally doubled. In this case, it's not doubled, but that's common enough. The doubling is really kind of a function of specifically 4 voice textures. But as we can see, this is essentially an Italian augmented sixth chord, at least sonically. That's how it sounds. To my ear, the Italian augmented sixth chords are clean. They're clean, precise, they're very elegant, they're simple sounding. I think, to me, that flavor is what you should keep in mind. The French augmented sixth chords are a bit more exotic sounding. This would be a French augmented sixth chord. A little more bizarre, a little stranger flavor. And a German augmented sixth chord, of course. And we wouldn't resolve it to a 5 chord. It would be go to a cadential 6/4. German augmented sixth chord just tends to sound fuller, richer. But anyway, Italian augmented sixth chord, clean, direct, simple. That's what I keep in mind here. All right, so Beethoven, Overture to the Creatures of Prometheus. Okay, pretty straightforward. Now this is a piano reduction, obviously. This is an orchestral piece otherwise. So if there is an augmented sixth chord, that most likely means it's on lowered scale degree 6, which resolves to scale degree 5. And since this is a theory example, we know that the thing is going to be in here somewhere, probably at the end. No key signature. Here's a G major chord. We're probably in C major. We almost have enough proof. We don't have a tonic, but we have basically everything else. So if we're in C major, that would mean we have a 5, 4, 2 of 4, right? Because this is a C dominant 7 chord, which is the 5 of F major, 5, 7 of F major. What do we get next? An F major chord in first inversion, which in C major is 4. So that means that this is a 5, 4, 2 of 4, and 4, 6. Now let's look at this last chord if we write it in the simplest form possible. So A flat, C, F sharp. And what you'll see is that the F sharp, at least initially, is doubled on the downbeat. Let's look at the next two chords. Same notes, but we now see that the C has been doubled. So, as we can see again, that's our classic Italian augmented sixth chord. It's that simple, clean, direct, just 3 notes. Right? The French and the German augmented sixth chords have 4 separate pitches that make up the harmony. The Italian has only 3 pitches that make up the chord. So this is Italian augmented sixth. And again, you can see that it looks like a minor 4/6 where weirdly the root has been raised. But remember what I said about you will not see sharp 1, sharp 2, sharp 5. This is just not a thing. That's why we don't call this chord a sharp 4/6. We have essentially broken tonal harmony at that point, which is why we give this its own silly name, Italian augmented sixth. Okay, so that's that. And of course, that resolves to 5, as you do. All right, so now we have some Brahms im Herbst. Let's play this. And let's see what that text translates to. Because again, you guys are thinking about this. We want to know how composers are actually using these chords, not just that they're using them. So, seligste means blessed, most blessed, and then erguss means effusion, outpouring. So, kind of a blessed outpouring, a blessed effusion. So most blessed, most expressive. So let's look at what we end up with. We can see we gotta have a sort of a dominant cadence thing going on here. And this looks like a C major 6/4 chord, and then we have a G dominant 7 chord, and then we have a C major chord again. So clearly the end of this is suggesting C major, right? So let's just assume it's C major, which would mean we see what we have here. We have a 1-6-4 chord resolving into a 5-7 chord. So this is a cadential 6-4, most likely. 5-6-4 to 5-3, and we have some little suspensions in there. Then 1. This is a imperfect, authentic cadence. And if we have an augmented 6th chord, it's going to be most likely on scale degree 6. And we can see, lowered scale degree 6, we see we have our lowered scale degree 6. So let's figure out exactly which kind it is. Now, at the downbeat here, we have an A flat major chord, which if we're thinking in terms of modal mixture, that would be it's scale degree 6, but lowered, flat 6, flat 6, 6 that is borrowed from C minor, right? And if we want an augmented 6th, we need that interval of an augmented 6th, so we have A flat in the bass, a 6th above that is F. Then to make it an augmented 6th, so it's wandering into the sonic world of the 7th, we raise that F. And now we have to look at the inner voices. So we also have a C, and we also have an E flat. And as you can see here, we have essentially kind of a little voice exchange between the alto and the tenors. Now, this middle chord, this isn't really anything that has a name. We can see that that D is doubled. It sounds an awful lot like a French augmented 6th, but remember a French augmented 6th has 4 separate distinct pitches, just like a German augmented 6th. And it's not an Italian augmented 6th because we don't have that 3rd in the bottom. So I'm just going to say these are just passing tones. Okay, it's just a voice exchange. Really what this is, because we end up in exactly the same place we were previously, just now with the alto and tenor swapped. This is a German augmented 6th. Now, notice the way it's spelled is the minor key version of a German augmented 6th with an E flat. Brahms could have, if he chose to, spelled this E flat up here as a D sharp. Because that D sharp, remember sharps go up, that D sharp would want to go up to an E natural. He doesn't. We don't have to make a big deal out of this, but I think it's important to notice that when you have an E flat, remember, flats go down. If you have an E flat that goes to an E natural, think of that, as I said before in a previous class, as a negation. All that means for you as a performer is just know that this is a surprise. Brahms, in notating it as an E flat, wants you to be a little bit surprised, because what you should have gotten with that E flat is that. And instead, it should feel like a bright ray of sunshine just kind of peered out of the clouds. And the implication of that comes from the fact that he spelled it as an E flat and not as a D sharp. If you spell it as a D sharp, you are anticipating a major resolution, a major chord resolution. If you spell it as an E flat, you are anticipating a minor chord resolution. Okay, so these are things that only you, the performer, knows looking at the score, but it can shape how you interpret what you see on the page. The way great composers notate their scores, they're like secret messages to you. And as an old teacher of mine used to say, they're like love letters to you, the performer. Okay, German augmented sixth resolves to a cadential 6/4, resolves to 1. Let's hear that one more time. Remember, seligste Erguss, that means blessed effusion, blessed outpouring. There's something sort of spiritually meaningful about those first 3 beats, or I guess first 9 beats of the progression. So again, chromaticism equals magic, equals the otherworldly, the spiritual, the godlike. Okay, Schubert. We have Franz Schubert, Sonata for Violin in D. No words here, but I'll try to play everything. One more time. Sorry. Okay, beautiful. Love Schubert. So, if we are looking for an augmented sixth chord, it's probably, again, going to be on lowered scale degree 6. If we look at where this progression ends up, we get a cadence into D major. We have that lowered scale degree 6 in D major, which goes into a cadential 6/4. This is most likely, most definitely in D major. Because remember, an augmented sixth chord is essentially a subdominant functioning harmony. So all we would need to define a key would be tonic, subdominant, dominant, tonic. It could be 1, augmented sixth, whatever flavor, 5, 1. We are in that key. Okay, so first chord, we spell it from the bottom up. We have B, D, G, put that in root position, and that is a 4 chord, 4, 6. Okay, now we spell this next chord from the bottom up, B flat, D, E, G sharp. Okay, so this looks like minor 4 chord, switching to treble clef here. Here is our minor 4 chord. To make this an Italian augmented sixth chord, we raise that top note, and double the third, and then to make the French augmented sixth, we take one of those inner voices and bring it up, and the French augmented sixth has those 2 nested augmented fourths. So there's an augmented fourth, there's an augmented fourth. This is a French augmented sixth. And remember, I mentioned a French augmented sixth can resolve either to 5 or to a cadential 6/4. You're very unlikely to see an Italian augmented sixth chord go to a cadential 6/4. Usually it's a French augmented sixth or German augmented sixth that will end up in a cadential 6/4. French augmented sixth has the option of a cadential 6/4. A German augmented sixth, it is a mandatory cadential 6/4 that follows. But here we have 1, 6/4, which ends up with a 5, 7 chord, and we have a little 3, 6 action in between. Remember I talked about how 3, 6 ends up behaving like 5. Really just 5, 7 with a little 3, 6 interjection, just voice leading. So we had a 1, 6/4 on a strong beat, and then 5, 7 or 5 on weaker beats. So this is definitely cadential 6/4, preceded by subdominant. All right, so French augmented sixth, we had some passing tones here. Always want to make sure you label those. For this 3 chord, you could have just said these are passing tones if you want. I think it's worth acknowledging Schubert put these dots in the violin, which really kind of means resistance, musical resistance, not staccato. In the 19th century, when you see portato like this, so they look like staccato markings, but there's a slur over it, it really means resistance. Jim, pom, 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 ba. It didn't mean bum, 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 bum. That's how we think of it now. In the 19th century, portato was a sort of resistance. Maybe I'll play that Schubert one more time just so you can hear it. Okay, Josephine Lang. Okay, now we're getting interesting. Now things are getting a little funky. All right, so let's look at this text. Mit deinem Blumenkörbchen, willkommen auf der Fleur. So translation, with your flower basket, welcome to the meadow. I don't know this song, actually, other than this excerpt, but with this text, we can see Lang setting up like kind of 2 different thoughts, right? Describing with your flower basket, welcome to the meadow. We have 2 kind of different thoughts, images that are being brought together. So as you can see, what she's done tonally is that we kind of have 2 tonal halves to this phrase. So I'll play this for you. That the first half of this phrase kind of seems to be doing one thing, and the second half of this phrase is doing something else. So clearly they want us to label a cadence, which means there is a cadence. Composers won't always tell you, but you just have to look for it. There is a cadence at the very end. So that's a 5-1 of some kind, 5-7-1, which means we're probably in C major. Oh, and look, they even told us C major. So if we're in C major, all this stuff over here, lowered scale degree 6, C, D, E, F, G, A. Bring it down a half step. We have flat 6. Okay. So this next chord, this is an E flat dominant 7th chord in first inversion. E flat dominant 7 is the 5 of A flat major, which means that in this case, this would be the 5-6-5 of flat 6. So I was talking about applied dominance, secondary dominance of modal mixture chords before. Here's a perfect example of one. So now we have another flat 6 chord. Right, A flat major. We have most of what we need. We have a chord that sounds like a dominant 7th. Could resolve here, resolve to D flat. But if we look at how she spelled it from the bottom up, we have A flat, C, E flat, F sharp. So the boundary of that chord, the A flat to the F sharp, again, notice how I take all the notes and I squish them down into a space that is an octave or less. That is an augmented 6 at the boundary. Okay. So we have, it's an augmented 6th chord of some kind, right? And it sounds like a fully dominant 7th chord. And if we look to where it resolves to a 6-4 chord. cadential 6/4, right? So 5, 6, 4. We have, you know, some suspension activity going on here, but let's just say 8, 6, 4, and then 7, 5, 4, and then 3. Okay, this is what we have. Okay, so the only augmented sixth chord that must resolve to a cadential 6/4 is a German augmented sixth. That sonority also sounds an awful lot like a full-bodied dominant seventh chord, so we're going to call this a German augmented sixth. If it was a French augmented sixth, it would sound like that. It would be spelled A flat, C, D, F sharp. We would have the two nested augmented fourths. Augmented fourth, but in this case what we have is a perfect fifth and an augmented fourth. Sounds like a dominant seventh. This is a German augmented sixth. We have a little passing tone here, chromatic passing tone. And you can see that that F sharp, which ends up in the voice, also in the piano, resolves up, and the A flat resolves down, as it should. Sharps go up, flats go down. And in terms of a cadence, this is a perfect, authentic cadence. Again, I highly recommend that you do these and then watch my analysis of each one to make sure that you're kind of following along with the same logic. Otherwise, if you just watch me do it, you won't remember. You'll just, you know, information in in one ear, out the other, and I will be very unforgiving. Okay, so we have Hortense de Beauharnais, éloigne-toi, move away. My terrible French, almost as bad as my terrible German. All right, so let's hear this. So the text is, move away, éloigne-toi, companion of my pain near death, said a deserter. So, éloigne-toi, move away. Very deep, very pathetic, much pathos. So, cadence at the end. We are basically given the key, the tonal area, all right here. We have, if we were, well, you know, we have some sort of a dominant tonic relationship going on here, which would be in B minor. So that would be 5, 7 to 1 in B minor. Go chord before, that's a 1, 6, 4 chord, which comes from a 2 diminished 6 chord. So if it's a 1, 6, 4 chord that resolves to a 5 chord and comes from something other than a dominant chord, this is a cadential 6/4. So this would be 5, 6, 4 to 7, 5, 3. We could write in the 8 if we want. We don't have to. So we have the whole key right here. The tonal, all we need to define the tonality is right here. We have a tonic, subdominant, dominant, tonic. So we're definitely in B minor. Okay, so we'll write in B minor. So we have our 1, and then we would be looking for a chord built on a scale degree 6 that has an augmented sixth interval in it that then resolves to a 5 chord. Here's a 5 chord, And if we look at this funky looking thing here, spell it from the bottom up, G, B, C sharp, E sharp. We have that augmented sixth from the top, augmented sixth there. And if we look at the structure of the chord internally, we have augmented fourth, two nested augmented fourths. This is a French augmented sixth chord, okay, which can resolve directly to 5 if it wants. It could also resolve to a cadential 6/4. It doesn't in this case. So then we have the same, exact same progression repeated again. Okay. Then we have essentially a kind of evaded cadence here. This is a 5 chord that ends up in a 1/6 chord. Then we have a 5/6/5/1, 2 diminished 6, cadential 6/4, etc., etc. And if we look at how these voices all resolve, we end up with 1 in the soprano, 1 in the highest voice, scale degree 1, approached by step from either above or below. This is a perfect, authentic cadence. Okay, Beethoven. So a little bagatelle. Let me play this. Actually, let me switch pianos so that we hear what Beethoven would have heard. So Beethoven would have heard a Broadwood. Let's get our, there we go. So this is the kind of piano Beethoven would have heard. That's much louder. Let's do 435. Okay. Okay, that's our little bagatelle there. So we can see, again, looking at the end, we are essentially getting a kind, well, look at the end, we do get a sort of 5/1 thing going on. We also have a sort of a subdominant action going on here. That would be a 4/7 / maybe a kind of a 2 diminished 6. Then we have what kind of sounds like, you don't get all the notes, and this is something you have to remember. Composers won't always give you all the notes. They sort of imply that some notes are there. That's essentially the progression that we're getting at the end there, just with, you know, non-chord tones here and there. So this is a cadential 6/4, 5/6/4 to 5/3 to 1. All right, so that is our tonal center. This is most definitely a perfect, authentic cadence in the key of G minor. So if we start there, you'll see we don't get a G in that first chord. We just get, which could be B flat, right? You could say, potentially, that this is a 3/6 chord. Or, sorry, a 3 chord. What am I saying? Not 6, a 3 chord. Right, that would make sense, potentially. And this, if we added an F sharp in, would look an awful lot like a 5/4/3 chord, then a 1 chord, then a 5/6 chord. You You could also say that this is a 1/6, but with no root, which, you know, sounds sounds like just a sort of an act of heresy to not have a root. But again, composers will often leave things out. If Beethoven heard this and just thought, oh, this is too obvious, I'm going to leave some things out, make it a little mysterious, it still sounds like G minor. So again, you could call it 1/6, you could call it 3. They both kind of mean the same thing. Just know, again, composers don't always give you the note that you need. This also has no third. Then we have 1. Here's a friend, old friend. Write this out from the bottom up and put it in root position. You can see this is a minor 5 chord. This is a 5/6 chord. This is a passing 5/6 chord. This is what's known as the lament progression, which usually ends with a Phrygian cadence. Right? Same thing here. And where there are Phrygian cadences, or where there are likely to be Phrygian cadences, you are also potentially likely to get augmented 6th chords. So if we look at this chord, write it from the bottom up. At the boundary we have augmented 6th. There are only 3 notes in this chord. There's a third above the bass, and then an augmented 6th. This is an Italian augmented 6, and then 5. Okay. I don't need to analyze the rest of this. I just, you know, did what I needed to figure out what key this was in, but just know that sometimes you will get this chord progression with the lament progression, but with an augmented 6th stuck in the middle. Okay, let's go on. Something kind of fun here. This is George Gershwin. Go back to a modern piano. All right. However it goes. I'll play it one more time. Okay, lovely. That's super fun. Again, look at the end of the phrase. You get what sounds like a kind of a 5-7-1 thing going on. So let's assume A minor until we have reason to believe otherwise. So here's a 1 chord. All right, that makes sense. I have a little neighbor tone up here. Then another little, what looks like a passing tone. Let's see what comes next. Write these out from the bottom up. G sharp, B, D, E. Put that in root position. That's a 5 chord in first inversion. 5-6-5. Then we get 1. Now notice the leading tone on the bass here should have resolved back to this note. Gershwin takes us down the octave. Anytime a composer breaks voice leading like this, I call that, I like to, you know, draw a solid or a sort of a red line just to be like, a negation happened here. Something was supposed to happen, resolution by a half step, and the composer did something else. Okay, so we have 1 again, same neighbor tone, passing tone, 5, 6, 5. Okay, now something interesting. This chord, let's spell that from the bottom up. So this is a little grace note. We can call that a incomplete neighbor tone, most likely. You can see it was approached by leap and then resolved by step. So we have F sharp, A, C natural, D sharp. Put that in root position. Where does this chord want to resolve? Well, it contains two diminished fifths, right? Diminished fifth here, diminished fifth here. Diminished intervals want to collapse. Augmented intervals want to expand. So this wants to resolve to that. We've heard that before, right? This is an E major chord. Sorry, getting a little cluttered there. That's 5, right? So this is a dominant of E major. This is the 7, diminished 7 of E major, and E major in this context is 5. So this is the 7 diminished 6, 5 of 5. And we could have easily have just gone straight to 5. Right? Perfectly reasonable. But remember what I said earlier about how the secondary dominant of 5 is very close to augmented sixth chords. So if we look at this lovely thing here, write this from the bottom up, write it down here. So F natural, A, B, D sharp. Remember that this sharp applies from earlier in the bar. Don't forget your accidentals. Accidentals are really important. Accidentals apply for the entire bar. Don't forget them. So we have a chord that is on scale degree 6, natural scale degree 6 in minor, and it has an augmented sixth interval at the boundary, right? So it's an augmented sixth chord. It ends up in a 5 chord, and it has two nested augmented fourths. There's an augmented fourth. There's an augmented fourth. It is a French augmented sixth chord. Note, see how close it is to the 7 diminished 6, 5 of 5. Is this a negation? I guess so, but the way to think about it is the secondary dominant and the French augmented sixth have the same destination, right? The secondary dominant wants to resolve to 5. The French augmented sixth also wants to resolve to 5. So they're not exactly negating each other. They both have a common goal, which therefore means we can kind of put them side by side, and it's not that this didn't resolve, it's just that its resolution is delayed somewhat. But they're both resolving to the same place. They're not, the French augmented sixth is not negating what the 7 diminished 6, 5 of 5 was doing. It's just they're both going to the same place. Okay, so you're going to start to see stuff like this where these two chords don't make sense side by side. Like this chord shouldn't resolve here. Just look and see what happens next. It's entirely possible they both have the same destination. Okay, so that's that. Fanny Mendelssohn-Hensel. Let's hear this. One more time. Very nice. So nice that it's sort of the same key. If we assume based on where it ended up, this is E major chord, which is the dominant of A minor. Probably end on 5 here and starting on 1. So if we're looking for augmented sixth chords, we're looking for a chord on scale degree 6 that has an augmented sixth interval in it. So let's look at the notes in this chord. So that is scale degree 6. We have A, B, and D sharp. Okay. And then if we look at what happens next, that B collapses in on the other A, so we now have a doubled A. Then we have this neighbor tone. Remember this, because this will be, the example on the next page has something similar to this. We have, this is an Italian augmented sixth chord. Because we have that doubled third, that doubled the third of the chord. And the previous chord has those 2 nested augmented fourths. So this is a French augmented sixth that, by way of voice leading, slips into an Italian augmented sixth. So be on the lookout for this. You often will see different flavors of augmented sixth chords slipping in and out of each other. Now, do you need to say French augmented sixth chord and Italian augmented sixth chord? No, not really. I don't think so. I think it would be perfectly reasonable to just say the whole bar, French augmented sixth. It's embellished. I also said it's somewhat unlikely to have an Italian augmented sixth chord go to a cadential 6/4, which is what this is. 5, 6/4 to 5, 3, which I think is justification for thinking of this whole bar as a French augmented sixth with a little embellishment. But this is to say that French augmented sixth and Italian augmented sixth are very close to each other. All of these augmented sixth chords are very close to each other. So it's possible that one can slip into the other. The only place where this would be an issue is if it slipped into a German augmented sixth. That would be, then it would absolutely have to resolve to a cadential 6/4. In this case, with the French augmented sixth, it has the option to, but it doesn't have to. All right, so onwards. Here we have some Schumann. We're almost done. Play this little miniature. Funny little piece. We have another friend who's showed up here. Let me play that one more time. Yeah, odd little piece. All right, so in terms of key, we can hear that at the very end there was a cadence of some kind. So we can kind of assume this is a cadential 6/4 in the prevailing key, which looks like A minor, and we have scale degree 7 resolving to scale degree 1, so that would be a perfect authentic cadence. So we back up a little bit. This is probably A minor. A minor. So this piece starts with a funky looking chord on scale degree 6. All right. I won't analyze this whole thing, just a couple of points here. We have an augmented 6th chord at the boundary. Then we have what looks like a cadential 6/4. Right, a cadence right off the bat. This chord here is on scale degree 6 with an augmented 6th interval. It must be an augmented 6th chord. And it has a perfect 5th and an augmented 4th nested together. Sounds like a dominant 7th chord. This must be a German augmented 6th, and it resolves into a cadential 6/4. So it must be a German augmented 6th. We have the same chord later on over here. I just want to point out a funny chord that we heard. This thing. What is this thing over here? You know this chord. Write this from the bottom up. D, F, B flat. Put it in root position. This is flat 2, 6. This is our Neapolitan chord. What is the dominant of B flat major? The dominant of B flat major is F dominant 7. Right? F dominant 7 wants to resolve to B flat major, but what if we respelled that E flat as an F sharp? Well, would you look at that? The German augmented 6th is the dominant, or sounds a lot like the dominant, of flat 2. And this is an ambiguity that a lot of composers use, and Schumann is highlighting it here. He comes back to this German augmented 6th chord a couple of times. So he's been kind of playing this game. He's hinting at B flat major, but these augmented 6th chords kind of conserve double duty, hinting at flat 2 and also being able to slide in to a cadence in the original key. We're getting to the edge of breaking tonal harmony, and this is where we're kind of starting to see fractures appear. Okay, and then last couple things here. We have a bit from a Beethoven sonata, the Appassionata. Let's hear this. Okay, so let's look. We can kind of hear at the end we get something of a cadence, right? This is sort of a 5/7 bar, and then 1 sort of. So just D flat major. Let's just go on that premise. So we have 1, we have 4, we have 1, a nice plagal cadence, plagal motion as a sort of prolongation. Okay, we got something funky here. This is B flat is scale degree 6 in D flat major, and now we have B flat lowered. It's lowered 6, lowered scale degree 6. write this from the bottom up. B double flat, D flat, E natural, G natural. Sounds an awful lot like a dominant seventh chord. Right? Has that quality. So we're thinking German augmented sixth, most likely. But if you look at the spelling has an E natural. Sharps go up, flats go down. We've taken that E flat, sharped it. That E natural wants now to resolve up to an F. That makes this the major key spelling of a German augmented sixth, which makes this technically a Swiss augmented sixth. And I forgot to say, Swiss augmented sixth looks like a French augmented sixth, right? It sort of has that same appearance. You have the second in the middle rather than a triad. And the Swiss are notoriously sort of all ethnicities at once, at least in their neighborhood, French, German, Italian. So this is a Swiss augmented sixth. But notice we have some kind of parallel fifth action going on. Again, there's nothing wrong with this. From our point of view, just notice it. If you notice it, you can see Beethoven is being rough around the edges. He knew better. Should have done this. Instead he goes. It kind of accents this arrival. Beethoven is accenting the arrival by having parallel fifths. Okay. Last example, and this is basically, this is the moment tonal harmony breaks. Really, this is the piece that is sort of attributed with breaking tonal harmony. This is the Prelude to Tristan und Isolde by Richard Wagner. I'll just play you a little bit, and you can tell me what key we're in. Should have done that. Etc., etc. What key are we in? Well, this is a kind of an open-ended question because the answer is technically not really any key, and this piece never resolves. And part of what makes this prelude and the entire opera of Tristan and Isolde extraordinary is that it never really cadences in the key that we feel it wants to, which is A major and or A minor. Never does. Doesn't happen. And it gives the music this yearning quality. We want a resolution. Should have done that. But it doesn't. Never. In the whole piece. But he hints at it. And what do we hear right off the bat? The This is what's known as the Tristan chord right here. If we spell this from the bottom up, what is this thing? Is there any inversion we can find where we get a root position of some kind? No, it's not. As spelled, it is not a thing. What does it resolve to? It resolves to a French augmented sixth. Which then resolves to another French augmented sixth. Really, it's kind of an accented passing tone, but etc., etc., etc. It's an infinite loop. We have broken reality. We have stepped. I have passed through a wall. I have done something supernatural. Anyway, this is where we're going. This is kind of where things go. These chords which are the product of chromatic voice leading captured in a bottle and given a name, is the beginning of the end of tonal harmony. It is the beginning of the end of this Enlightenment era experiment. So, we'll leave it here. This is just a little philosophical thought at the end. If you have any questions about any of this, even though I'm gone, please send me a note, send me an email, and I will be grading your stuff, and have fun. These are pretty wild and pretty interesting, and they have a lot of creative and expressive potential in terms of your song setting. So use them wisely. Use them because you want that really kind of weird, off-piste flavor that these chords give you. Okay, have a great week.